This film is about the River Meon in Hampshire and the reasons it's attracted settlers for thousands of years. It's about the Saxons, the communities they established, the churches they founded, and the rich and enduring heritage and culture that they left us. The River Meon rises in chalk springs at the foot of Butser Hill, the highest point on the western side of the South Downs National Park. The South Downs and its hills provide spectacular views all the way to the coast and the Isle of Wight. From these springs, the river flows through the Meon Valley first west and then south, over 20 miles to the wetlands at Titchfield Haven, before entering the Solent at Hillhead Harbour, opposite the Isle of Wight. Meon may be a Celtic word, possibly meaning swift one or treasure, but rain falling on the hills takes many years to filter through the chalk before emerging as a series of springs. The crystal clear water quality and constant temperature of 10 degrees centigrade encourages and supports a wide range of flora, fish, invertebrates and wildlife. Butser Hill, Old Winchester Hill, Beacon Hill in the north and Titchfield Haven in the south are all nationally renowned wildlife nature reserves enjoyed by residents and visitors alike. The Meon Valley's constant fresh water and rich natural resources attracted settlement from as early as the Bronze and Iron Ages. Produce from hilltop and later valley farming was transported through and across the valley along trails and, where possible, on the river. It could also have been taken further using the Roman roads and the nearby network of ancient drovers' roads, trading routes and pilgrimage trails, precursors of today's long-distance paths such as the South Downs Way. The Roman army defended the local population from attacks by raiders and pirates using a series of coastal forts such as at Porchester, a few miles east of the Meon Valley. After the final recall of the legions to Rome in 410, Saxons, Angles, Jutes and Frisians came from mainland Europe. They were initially welcomed as defenders, replacing the Romans, but over time they established dominance over the local population. Those who settled in the Meon Valley became known as the Meonwara, or people of the Meon. By the 10th century, rulers of Wessex, such as Alfred the Great, had united all areas of England, even those under Viking rule, with his grandson Athelstan, becoming the first Anglo-Saxon king of England. The capital of Wessex and England was Wintanchester, Winchester, just 10 miles to the west of the Meon Valley. The Saxons left us a rich heritage, much still part of our lives. Our national coinage, English shires and burghs, what we now call towns. The monarchy and its rituals, our laws, central and local governance, and our language. For over 300 years, the Meon Valley was part of the royal estate, at the heart of Wessex and Anglo-Saxon England. The Saxon rule of England and Wessex came to an end when King Harold, Duke of Wessex, was killed at Hastings in 1066. The Romans used man-made materials, bricks, tiles, and even a form of cement to construct their buildings. Evidence of these buildings can still be seen today, such as the facade of a Roman barn weighing over 10 tons found at Meonstoke. The upper part of this is now on display in the British Museum. The Saxons used largely natural materials, wattle and daub, wood and thatch for their buildings. Local archaeological excavations have uncovered little evidence of their buildings except post holes. Saxon cemeteries with skeletons and grave goods have, however, been found along the valley at Droxford, Meonstoke and as recently as 2012 in West Meon. The Sustainability Centre on the Downs overlooking the Meon Valley also used natural materials to construct its outdoor woodland classroom, just as the Saxons would have done. Guests on holiday or school parties attending the courses they run on green living can stay in large wood-framed yurts and teepees. As with Saxon buildings, archaeologists excavating the site in the future will only find post holes where the yurts and teepees once stood. A few miles from the Meon Valley is Butser Ancient Farm, a living archaeological reconstruction of Iron Age buildings that have many similarities to those built by the Saxons. The local people remaining after the Romans withdrew would have been a mix of Christians and followers of Roman deities. The Saxons would have worshipped their own gods, such as Thor and Woden. The northern Saxon kingdom of Northumbria, with abbeys at Wearmouth, Jarrow and Lindisfarne, became the source of a new wave of Christian missionaries in the 7th century. The Lindisfarne Gospels and other beautifully illuminated manuscripts show the extent of Saxon craftsmanship. That same skill was also evident in jewellery and metalwork, such as the Alton buckle, which is found in Hampshire and is now on display at the Curtis Museum in Alton. Copies of manuscripts were made in Northumbria to help the missionaries spread Christianity to the rest of England. Wilfrith, Bishop of York, and now known as St Wilfrid, was sent as a missionary from Lindisfarne to convert the Jutes and Saxons of South Hampshire, the Isle of Wight and West Sussex to Christianity. He probably arrived by sea at Titchfield and established churches along the Meon Valley between 681 and 686. Probably most of these early churches would have been built of wattle and daub or wood, such as the Greenstead Church in Essex. Over time, these churches were rebuilt in stone, enlarged, altered and renovated, so only elements of the earlier buildings remain. The Saxon church at Corhampton is an exception, largely unaltered since it was built in 1020. It provides an almost unique insight into what an original Saxon stone church would have looked like. We will now follow in St Wilfrid's footsteps by taking the Meon Valley Pilgrimage Trail to visit the sites of the churches he founded in the 7th century. In Saxon times, Titchfield, or Titchefell as it was called in the Domesday Book, was a tidal estuary port accessible from the sea over 2 miles downstream. There is strong evidence that the estuary even extended a mile upstream from Titchfield at the twice-daily high tide. Back then, the River Meon would have been deeper than it is today. The volume has diminished due to modern society's increased demand for water. In 1611, Titchfield's role as a tidal estuary port was changed following the building of a seawall by the 3rd Earl of Southampton. The wall stopped the tidal inflow of the sea and restricted the outflow of the River Meon, so creating a lake. The Earl also built a canal and lock gate, enabling boats access to the lake and port at Titchfield. In time, the canal and lake became unusable due to silt and deposits. The resulting wetlands eventually became Titchfield Haven National Nature Reserve. The reserve covers 369 acres of the lower Meon Valley and is home to a wide range of wildlife that could be seen from the coastal road, visitor centre and special hides. One of the few Saxon remains still visible in Titchfield is in the tower of St Peter's Church. This was probably part of the first church built by St Wilfrid in 680, and so is one of the oldest churches in England in continuous use. St Wilfrid may have used this church as a minster church, and so built it in stone. From here, he and his priests travelled along the valley to preach and convert the local population. Titchfield's mill is mentioned in the Domesday Book. The current mill building dates from the 19th century and is on the site of the original Saxon mill. The abbey at Titchfield was founded in 1222 and had oversight of the Saxon church at Corhampton. In 1537, Henry VIII enabled Thomas Wriothesley to acquire the abbey. He became Baron Titchfield and the first Earl of Southampton. He demolished most of the abbey and created a private residence, Place House. The third Earl, Henry Wriothesley, was a patron of William Shakespeare. Shakespeare may have worked as a tutor and schoolmaster for the Earl between 1589 and 1593 at Place House School in Titchfield. This was known as the Old Grammar School, but is now called Place House Cottage and is a private residence. Wickham, or Weecham in Old English, is reached by following the River Meon for a few miles via the hamlet of Funtley, Funtalay, meaning springs. Funtley is listed in the Domesday Book and is recorded as having a mill. Wickham is mentioned in a Saxon royal charter dated 826. It has the second largest square in England. In the Roman era, it was probably near a military post at the point that the roads between Chichester, Winchester and Bitton in Southampton met. It is listed in the Domesday Book, which also refers to its mill. The Church of St. Nicholas in Wickham dates from 1120 and sits on what was the edge of the terrace that formed the east bank of the river and was probably the site of an earlier church. It's located at what was the pre-13th century centre of the village and close to its manor house. The church was restored in the late Victorian period. Wickham is the southernmost point of the Meon Valley Trail. This follows the route of the disused Meon Valley Railway for 11 miles north to West Meon and provides a safe, traffic-free resource for walkers, cyclists and horse riders. Soberton, or Soothberritoon in Old English, is listed in the Domesday Book. Its church is St. Peter's, which dates from 1180. The perpendicular tower was created in the 16th century when the original Norman tower was rebuilt. A Roman coffin in the churchyard was found locally. Droxford is first mentioned in 826 in a royal document. Its name probably means dry fields near a ford. In the Domesday Book, it's listed as belonging to the Bishop of Winchester. It also mentions it had 2 mills. One remains today and is a private house. A Saxon cemetery has been discovered in the area. In 1944, just before D-Day, Winston Churchill stayed on a train in Droxford railway sidings to meet other Allied leaders and visit General Eisenhower at Southwick House, the HQ for the invasion, to review the planning and preparations. During this period, the Meon Valley and its ancient royal forest of Beer was a principal camp and route for the 20th century warriors of the Allied invasion force. Droxford Church, St Mary and All Saints, is of Norman origin. It's likely that the current church is on the site of an earlier one founded by St Wilfrid and must have been of significant importance, judging by its richly carved side doors. Meonstoke, or Meonstock in Old English, means farm depending on the Meon. A Roman villa complex was discovered locally when the road through the Meon Valley was widened in preparation for carrying military transport during World War II. The excavation of this site in the 1970s and 80s led to the discovery of a Saxon settlement and graves. The church at Meonstoke, dedicated to St Andrew, was built between 1223 and 1235, probably by the same masons who built the Great Hall at Winchester. It has a Welsh border-style tower made of wood. Close to the Saxon church at Corhampton and adjacent to the church at Meonstoke and on the bank of the River Meon is the Buck's Head, a 16th century mead hall, reminiscent of those in which the Saxons would have met, celebrated, and recited epic ancestral stories and poems such as Beowulf. Corhampton, or Corhamptoon in Old English, is mentioned in the Domesday Book and means the corn estate in an enclosure. The Saxon church is remarkable for the fact that it's not dedicated to a named Christian saint and stands largely as it was built in 1020 on a circular mound, probably on the site of an original church built by St Wilfrid. The magnificent yew tree may be older than the church, as it was customary to build churches next to an established tree. In the churchyard is a Roman sarcophagus, which came from the nearby Roman villa complex. Exton first appears in Saxon documents in 940. It was called Sexna Toon in Old English, which means farmstead of the East Saxons. In the Domesday Book, it's said to have always been used by the monks of Winchester. The area around the village is dotted with signs of earlier settlement. Saxon artefacts have been found in and around the village. The South Downs Way, an old drove trail, crosses the River Meon at Exton. The Church of St Peter and St Paul is an early English two-cell church dating from the 12th century. It is believed that an earlier church existed on the same site. The current church is built of flint and mortar. It was greatly altered in 1847. Since then, further changes have been more cosmetic. Warnford or Wearnford has evidence of Saxon settlement. The origin of Warn is unclear and may refer to a local tribal leader and so be Ford of Warn. The Church of Our Lady was refounded by Adam de Poor shortly after the Norman conquest, probably on the site of an earlier church built by St Wilfrid in 682. Nothing visible of those earlier churches remain, other than maybe a Saxon sundial now inside the porch. The earliest part of the current church is a very fine tower from around 1180, with unusual round openings in the bell tower. The church sits in Warnford Park, which was possibly designed by Lancelot Capability Brown and has one of the best snowdrop displays in the country each year. Beyond the east end of the church stands the remains of an early 13th century hall house. It is one of only a few examples of an aisled manor hall to be seen in the UK. West Meon is listed in the Domesday Book as belonging to the bishops of Winchester and having 2 mills and a church. An earlier church was pulled down and replaced by the current one on a nearby site in 1846. This new church is called St John the Evangelist. The work was overseen by Sir George Gilbert Scott, a leading member of the Gothic Revival movement and designer of the Albert Memorial in Hyde Park and Midland Grand Hotel at St Pancras, amongst other buildings. The age of the old church is uncertain, but looks medieval from surviving prints and possibly was on the site of a church founded by St Wilfrid. Any remains of the old church now lie below ground in the graveyard. The memorial cross in the centre of the village is said to have been erected near to where an ancient yew tree stood, under which St Wilfrid preached. Thomas Lord, founder of Lord's Cricket Ground, Guy Burgess, double agent and member of the Cambridge Ring of Soviet spies, and the Reverend Kenneth Wills, a notable historian of the Saxon era in the Meon Valley, are buried in the churchyard. East Meon has evidence of Bronze Age burial barrows dating back to 2000 BC and Roman occupation in and around the village. It was first mentioned in a Saxon charter in the 7th century. It's listed in the Domesday Book as being owned by Bishop Stigand. It had 3 mills, so was probably a major agricultural production centre in Saxon times for more than just local use. The village of East Meon was chosen for the 1986 Winchester centenary of the Domesday Book as a typical English Domesday village. The scale model built for the occasion is now on exhibition in the Bayeux Tapestry Museum in Normandy. The Church of All Saints is one of the finest Norman village churches in England. Its importance is due to the fact that East Meon was owned by the bishops of Winchester from the time of William the Conqueror. The cruciform church was started shortly after the conquest by Bishop Henri of Blois, William the Conqueror's grandson, probably on the site of the church founded by St. Wilfrid. Near the church, the court hall can be seen. Probably built on the site of an earlier Saxon building, it was the administrative centre to monks managing the Bishop of Winchester's extensive local landholdings. Reflecting its connections to the bishops of Winchester, East Meon also contains many fine examples of hall houses. Finally, we arrive back again where we started our journey. Old Winchester Hill, a national nature reserve, stands to the north of the Meon Valley and enjoys an outstanding panorama of the South Downs all the way to the Solent and Isle of Wight in the south. The Iron Age fort on top of the hill has ramparts and a ditch for defence. Rounded Bronze Age barrows can be seen as well as platforms on which huts and animal enclosures were erected. Evidence of farming is also visible on the surrounding hillsides, showing the site was in long-term use for agricultural purposes. Although the barrows were excavated in 1807, the hillsides used for farming never have been. On the 14th of October 1066, at the Battle of Hastings, King Harold, his brothers, and many of the Saxon nobility and army were killed. A new chapter in the history of England and the Meon Valley began on Christmas Day 1066, with the crowning in Westminster Abbey of Guillaume le Conquérant, Duc de Normandy, as William I of England. But the influence of the Saxons did not end then. Their legacy is the England we know today. And one of the greatest gifts is at the heart of global trade, diplomacy, culture, and religion. That gift, the English language.
Father Ura, though the ert on heavenum, see thee nama Jehalgod, to become thin riche, ye weather thin willa, on earthan swaswa on heavenum, orna ye degwam lichen hlath, see lost today, and forgive us our guiltas, swaswa we forgiveth our guiltendom, and ne ye led to us kostnunga, a kalissos of evil, sudliche,